So this is the financial focus segment of our webinar. Today, we're going to talk about the number one retirement planning mistake. And as I said previously, folks, I've been doing this for 20 plus years. I've been a certified financial planner since 2012. I have seen this number one thing that greatly affects retirement planning more than anything. There's a lot. And I was talking to my wife about this and she said, are you going to do 1, 2, and 3? I said, I don't know, but this week I'm going to talk about the number one thing, in my opinion, that can really derail a good retirement plan. And I'll just dig into it and I'll tell you what it is not tracking, not accounting for, not properly considering your expenses. And we're going to dig into that in just a second. So let's go into that. And this is a mistake made by individuals and professionals alike. I'm very fortunate today. Today I have a coaching call with a group. I can't remember where they are, but we talk about financial planning. We talk about tax efficient planning. And it's not just the individuals. It's not just somebody who's doing it themselves, trying to put together their own plan on their spreadsheet or whatever they're using. It's also professionals. They're not properly calculating and accounting for expenses. So what does that mean? They'll say, well, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, how much do you need to spend every month in retirement? And Mr. and Mrs. Jones might say $10,000 a month. So the time that is often true is almost zero. So even with, I've shared with you before, if you've listened to us before, I work with a lot of engineers. If you don't know any engineers, they tend to be very analytical people that live in worlds of data. So they'll come to me or come to our team and say, I've been tracking my expenses for 35 years. Look at my spreadsheet. I want to share my spreadsheet with you. It's beautiful, works really well. We're happy to look at it. Almost always there are things that they are not considering. And even if they're considering it, as they review it, I work with a very intelligent individual and we were talking yesterday and he said, well, we're spending more than we thought. And now it's been a few years and now we want to slow that down. So that spending more than we thought is a whole other extension of not identifying your expenses. But that is not, how can I say this? That is not uncommon also, right? Because there are things you want to do. And even though you're planning for $10,000 a month, and even if your number really is, and we dig in and your number really is $10,000 a month, well, in the first few years, you might be spending an extra $20,000 or $30,000 a year just in things you want to do. We'll talk more about that. But the number one issue is, and number one in steps, not number one in priority, is you've got to identify the true expenses, because very rarely and almost never is it just that stated expense. Because when somebody's saying, oh, geez, I want to spend $10,000 a month, that's typically on the top of the head or maybe just a back of the envelope expense number. But most financial planners and most financial advisors take that number and they put it into their software and they say, okay, using that number, these are your projections. And then your plan has failed from the beginning. It's faulty from the beginning, because just like we talked about your investment foundation, your planning foundation has to be there. And if your stated amount that you want to spend in retirement is $10,000, but it's truly $12,000, you're starting off in the hole already. So how do you overcome that? This is a worksheet that we've put together. So every one of our clients gets this in the beginning of our relationship and every single year. And this is a spreadsheet that started, it was much different when it started, but it's evolved over time. And you'll see things on there that we've just added in, and many things people don't fill out, but many things people do. So there are, and I will say that again, it's very unusual for us not to capture something that somebody wasn't considering. Pet care is a big one. People say, oh, geez, I didn't realize I'm paying $4,000 or $5,000 a year in pet care. Sometimes it's hair and nails. Sometimes it's things that couples don't really want to talk about, but they have to talk about during this planning process to get to the real number. So that is the first thing. So, and if you're a client of ours, you've seen this sheet, and it's really important to have a process that you're working through to really shake those trees and figure out what those true expenses are. And I'm going to say it again, this is a mistake made by individuals and professionals alike. I will say that the majority of financial planners out there don't take the time to really shake the trees to figure out what your true expenses are. So you've got to get to those true expenses, identify those true expenses. And you have to identify these ongoing expenses. There's a big difference between ongoing expenses and one-time expenses. So, and this is another place where people will kind of miss the ball and sometimes overcalculate. They'll say, in this year, let's say in 2024, I bought a new car. It's really hard to. So today I'll share with you. I'm driving my daughter's car. She's away at college, so I'm driving her car. So a Toyota Corolla, I think, was about $30,000 when we bought it, and that's a modest amount for a new or newer car. So if I bought a new car this year, that might be in my budget. And I might just calculate that in my budget. I know that may sound extreme, but we see this, it's not unusual. And if I'm carrying that $30,000 every year, then I'm over budgeting. Does that make sense? So you've got to identify one-time expenses and ongoing expenses. Other one-time expenses might be renovations. I want a new kitchen. I want a new refrigerator. I want a new, we've got these different plans. So one-time expenses and ongoing expenses, it's really important to separate those out. Then you've got your aspirational expenses. So travel, major purchases, RVs, boats, vacation homes, retirement homes. You've got to flesh these things out. Because if these are things that if you're going back to that $10,000 a month and saying, well, that's about what I need. I'm figuring in some dining out, maybe I'm figuring in some entertainment, but that's about it. Again, you're going to want to do those things. If you want an RV now, you're probably going to want it next year in your retirement. Let's work it into the plan and identify if it's going to work, first of all, and maybe your RV fits well into your plan, or maybe it needs to get trimmed back or something different. But you need to identify these aspirational expenses. Don't let them just live out there, in your mind. Well, geez, if we can do this, we'll talk about it. We'll see what kind of money we have, and we could talk about it then. Build it into your plan, because then you can see the effect. Geez, what's an RV cost? I guess it could be anywhere from, tens of thousands of dollars to $1 million. I don't know. I've never really spent a lot of time looking at costs of RVs. Not to identify that deeply, but it's best to do that work and put it in your plan to see what a cost of something, an aspirational expense, will cost you in the long run. Because you might have $1 million, and I always say $1 million is a dangerous amount of money. Why is $1 million a dangerous amount of money? Well, first of all, because it's a lot of money. But if that's what you have in your retirement, you can go through that pretty quickly. So I say it's dangerous because you might think, well, geez, I can just take $100,000. I have $1 million. I can take $100,000 out of there, buy the RV I want, and I'm going to be okay. That might be the case, but you want to stress test that in the plan. If you're going to because you're feeling that wealth and you're feeling, well, hey, I have that money, I can just spend it. Okay, but what is the long-term effect going to be of taking that money out of your financial planning picture, spending it on something, and not having it to live off of in the future? As I was telling a client who was considering a house to buy and how much money they should fund to their house, I kept saying, you can't eat your house. You can spend money on your in your accounts on groceries, and you can eat those, but you can't eat your house. So you can't eat an RV either. You can have lots of fun in an RV, but we got to make sure your basic expenses are taken care of first for the rest of your life. But you have to first add in those aspirational expenses to see where we go with that. Aspirational expenses: travel, major purchases. How about fun? Many people say, well, geez, I want to spend $10,000, or I need to spend $10,000 a month. And I'll say, do you have fun built in there? Going out to dinner, traveling, seeing your kids, grandkids, whatever it is that you want to do when you're retired. And sometimes they say yes. Oh, yeah, I've got that factored in. Sometimes they say, no, that's my basic living expenses. Well, you've got to build in some fun because you want to live your life and you want to have fun in your retirement. So build in that fun. There are expenses commonly not considered. So let's talk about those. Folks, taxes, big one. And it's almost not your fault, right? Because if you're working with a major investment firm or a financial advisor that works with a major investment firm, what do they say about taxes? They say, we're not going to talk about them. They say, we don't do tax planning. They say, we don't give tax advice. We can't give tax advice, they say. Folks, that's crazy. Taxes are one of the largest expenses in your retirement, potentially. The fact that we give the grace to the major investment firms and what they call planning firms to just say, we're not going to talk about this. You got to talk to somebody else about that is crazy. But you have to pay attention to it. We're talking about capital gains tax. That's money that comes out of your taxable bucket. Remember the buckets, and we'll include the tax categories video in the description here. But your buckets. Capital gains comes out of your taxable buckets. You're going to treat those taxes differently, and they are treated differently than your ordinary income taxes that come out of your retirement, your traditional IRA buckets. We talked a lot in the weekly webinar section about required minimum distribution of RMDs. These are forced distributions from your IRAs, your 401ks, your retirement plans, your traditional retirement plans, 401ks, et cetera, and IRAs that you must pay tax on. So even if you think you're going to manage your taxes by not taking distributions and you'll pass it on to the next generation or maybe to a charity, well, you still have to account for it because at some point, currently after age 73, the IRS says this is exactly how much you have to take out, and we expect to be paid our taxes, or we're going to penalize you. And it could be up to 25% of what you should have taken out. So you have to pay attention to that. Many people don't consider tax on Social Security. If you're in your early to mid 50s, I'd be surprised if this is even on your radar. But your Social Security can be taxed at 0% or up to 50% of your benefit or up to 85% of your benefit subject to tax. So that's a game changer for people because, a limited number of people now get the statements, but you can go online at ssa.gov and you can get the projections for your Social Security. And most people hit an age, usually around 60, when they start looking at this. And they say, okay, I'm going to get, let's use an example, $3,000 a month. And that's part of their calculation. That's great. I can spend that. But you can't spend that $3,000 a month if you've got to give part of it back to the IRS. So you have to account for that. And you have to, if you're now in your mind, you're spending that $3,000 a month, you've got to draw it out of someplace else. Most people have most of their money in IRAs. So that comes out of IRAs and it's taxed. So to make up for the money you're sending to the IRS for the tax on Social Security, you got to take money out of your IRA probably and pay tax on that for sure if you take it out of your IRA. So you've got to take a larger amount to close that hole. I hope that makes sense. So taxation on Social Security is another big expense that many people are missing. IRMA. So let me just check these off so we know we talked about them. IRMA, income-related monthly adjustment amounts. This has to do with Medicare. So after you start receiving Medicare benefits, and if you're also getting Social Security at the same time, you get a withdrawal, or you have to pay an amount for your Medicare benefits. Your anything but Part A. So if you look at what those extra costs can be, depending on how much money you make and whether you're a single filer or a married filing joint filer, anything over $103,000 triggers this income-related monthly adjustment amount. If you're for a single filer, anything over $206,000 in what's called modified adjusted gross income triggers this income-related monthly adjustment amount. So that means that you're going to pay $69.90 under the current schedule. This changes every year. for your Part B premium. If you have Part D, there's another $12.90, but that's every month per individual. So that adds up, and you can see if it can get pretty expensive. 170, let's call it $175, $280, $384. That's monthly per individual. So that can get expensive, and these can be added expenses that you just might not be considering. So that is IRMA. How about medical and long-term care? I was talking to somebody just yesterday, and she was sharing with me that she was having a hard time getting her husband. She's totally bought in on doing some good financial planning and tax planning and all the things that you should be doing to prepare for a successful retirement. But her husband's not quite bought in on the whole thing yet, and one of the sticking points for her or for him is long-term care. So I suggested that she go to the Genworth Cost of Care, or Google Genworth Cost of Care. You can do this too. So I have no affiliation with Genworth. Genworth is a company, an insurance company, and they issued many long-term care policies. They don't issue them anymore, but they have a great database, and they have, they're still, I think, the largest provider of long-term care insurance, even though they don't currently issue any policies. But they've got some great information on their website, and you can go and put in your zip code, and you'll see exactly what different levels of care will cost. And then there's a sliding bar, and you can slide that bar right over and take you over the next 10, 20, 30 years. And you can see what the cost of care is going to be. And yes, it can be shocking. So if you imbibe, make sure you pour yourself a glass of wine or your favorite drink before you sit down and do that. It might help. But go to that Genworth Cost of Care and take a look at that. It's really, really eye-opening, because medical costs tend to increase as we get older. The curve looks like this. If this is the beginning of your retirement, and this is the time that you're no longer here, right? That's really what we're looking to fund. Many people think, well, I'm going to start taking out money here, and it's going to increase over time, and that's true because of inflation. But really, what happens is this: you tend to spend more early in retirement. You have a dip down, and then it increases. This increase here is due to medical. The waning here is due to, well, you've been traveling, maybe you're spending down your money, and most people just hit a point, they say enough. I just want to spend some time at home. Maybe it's not as easy for me to get around. And there's, I can't remember who coined the phrase, but there was this go years, slow go years, no go years. And people kind of map their spending based on that. But the problem is that if these are your go years, sure, you're likely to spend more. If these are your slow-go years, then it'll slow down for you. But the no-go years, you're still spending money, because most of us, our medical bills increase dramatically. And again, I would not just traditional medical, but some level of additional care, whether it's in-home care, long-term care, what have you. So pay attention to that medical. That's another expense that just isn't often considered enough. Inflation. Okay, everybody knows about inflation now. People have very, very short memories, and if we're successful to get inflation back to anywhere near 2%, I'm not optimistic, but the 100-year average is about 3.5%. Might be 3, but close enough. You've got to pay attention to inflation, because what if inflation is just at 3.5%? What if we just maintain inflation at 3.5%? Well, that doesn't sound like a lot, does it? Well, let me share with you an excerpt here of some work I did for somebody. And this is really simple. And we can just pay attention to, we can just forget these columns. They're the same. They repeat it, but they repeat it for a different reason. But today we're just going to focus on this. If you're 65 and 66 years old, and if that number is true, $10,000 a month is what you need to spend during retirement. If we just inflate that at 3.5%, by the time you're 74 and 75, that number grows to $156,573. So just to keep pace with the same bread, food, everything that you want to, your gas, your spending, all those things, just to keep pace with all of that, you're spending $156,000 a year to keep pace with $120,000 a year. That's inflation, folks. So that's now go out another 10 years. So now you're 20 here, 84 and 85. And you might say, well, geez, I'm not gonna be doing much at 84 and 85. I'm not gonna be traveling, so I won't need to spend as much money. If your basic expenses are $10,000 a year in this example, that $120,000 has now grown. The need has grown to $210,000. So that's usually where people their eyes open and they say, "Wow, that really adds up." So if you ask any 85-year-old today what their expenses were like in 20 years ago, they're going to give you all kinds of tales of how things were so much cheaper and how they were able to live off of much, much less. Well, we have to look, as planners, we have to look forward and see that. Now, I'll say that most planners do that. They'll factor in some kind of inflation rate. Individuals don't do it as well, typically, because it's hard to grasp. It's really hard to wrap your mind around it. Sometimes, folks, it's hard to wrap your mind around your actual expenses. We had one, again, very, very smart individual who told us they wanted to spend X number of dollars. When we shook the trees for them, use this planning chart, this expense sheet, we call it. We came out with a much higher number, and she just couldn't believe it. Even though she was doing it, and this is what she was spending, $180,000 a year compared to $110,000 a year, for example. And I think that was about what it is. Her husband was sitting next to her saying, "Yeah, that's right. Those numbers are right." She just still couldn't believe it. So sometimes it's hard to get your head around these things. And it just takes, folks, it just takes time and consistency, really, just like inflation. Other things that people aren't considering is housing, maintenance, cars. So housing, depending on where you are and listening to this, housing is very, very expensive today, and you have to pay for it somehow. So whether you're renting an apartment, some people sell their house and then you rent an apartment. Well, the problem with that is rents increase consistently over time. Once you buy a house, or even if you mortgage a house, your payment is steady, your taxes will increase over time, so you have to consider that as well. There are lots of considerations with housing. One of them is maintenance of the place that you live. Cars. Now, some people, they don't have two cars during retirement, and they just break it down to one, but some people want their ongoing independence, and they don't want to have to rely on looking for another person or waiting for another person, coordinating with another person. A lot of folks it depends. It's very generational. It seems to be who's comfortable with something like Uber. But cars are expensive, folks. It's really hard to find a car, a new car for sure, that's under $50,000. It's really easy to get up to those numbers. And what's not on here, and I'm going to add, is one of the other issues is that people don't review and you, Ole, every year you should review this. Every year, you should review your plan and including your expenses. That says every year you should review this financial plan. You should review your expenses. And yeah, folks, you should go through this exercise. So we do this with our clients, even though we've gone through this again. They get a brand new spreadsheet. We include their sheet that they did last year. But we go through, and this is where it gets really interesting. We'll have clients we work with, even 1 year or 2 years or 3 years or many years, whatever it is, and they'll tell us ongoing expenses is this, and it'll be drastically different the next year. Sometimes higher, sometimes lower, many times more expensive. But if you just set it in 2024 and you think it's going to ride and it's not going to change, you're going to be completely wrong. And the longer you let it go, the deeper that variation is going to get, and the more risk you're going to have in the success of your plan. So you have to go through this process every year. Identify those expenses every year. Folks, that is the number one thing that I see that works to derail a retirement plan. And that is not truly identifying those expenses, all the different categories of expenses that I talked about. If you start off with that faulty foundation of, I need to spend X number of dollars, and that amount is truly $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 more a month or a year even, then that your financial plan is flawed from the beginning. And unfortunately, it's probably going to look good for a little while, maybe even 3 years or more. depending on what's going on, but eventually it's going to show its cracks, and it may be past the point of no return. So make sure you don't make that mistake. That's the number one retirement mistake, in my opinion. Retirement planning mistake, not identifying the expenses. So that's the program for today. I hope it was helpful. I'm really looking forward to seeing you next week. We're going to have a whole new set of weekly webinar, and we're going to have a whole new financial focus. If you're not already a subscriber, hit that subscribe, like, and notification buttons. And if you need to reach out to me, you can do so at questions@attleborowealth.com. That's questions@attleborowealth.com. You can schedule time with us or with me on our website, and that's attleborowealth.com. Or if you can't find time on the digital calendar, you can reach out to us at questions@attleborowealth.com, and we'll schedule a 15-minute consultation. I hope that was helpful, and we'll see you next week. Take care.